to cook in. Fine tins, wonderful good some of them. Me and the old woman got ours that way." He pointed at the bundle she held, while she nodded proudly, beaming on me with good nature and consciousness of success and prosperity. "This overcoat is as good as a blanket," he went on, advancing the skirt of it, that I might feel its thickness. "And who knows, I may find a blanket before long." Again the old woman nodded and beamed, this time with the dead certainty that he would find a blanket before long. "I call it a holiday hopping," he concluded rapturously. "A tidy way of getting 2 or 3 pounds together and fixing up for winter. The only thing I don't like," and here was the rift within the lute, "is padding the hoof down there." It was plain the years were telling on this energetic pair, and while they enjoyed the quick work with the fingers, padding the hoof, which is walking, was beginning to bear heavily upon them. And I looked at their grey hairs and ahead into the future 10 years, and wondered how it would be with them. I noticed another man and his old woman join the line, both of them past 50. The woman, because she was a woman, was admitted into the spike, but he was too late, and separated from his mate, was turned away to tramp the streets all night. The street on which we stood, from wall to wall, was barely 20 feet wide. The sidewalks were 3 feet wide. It was a residence street. At least workmen and their families existed in some sort of fashion in the houses across from us. And each day, and every day, from 1 in the afternoon till 6, our ragged spike line is the principal feature of the view commanded by their front doors and windows. One workman sat in his door directly opposite us, taking his rest and a breath of air after the toil of the day. His wife came to chat with him. The doorway was too small for two, so she stood up. Their babes sprawled before them, and here was the spike line, less than a score of feet away. Neither privacy for the workman nor privacy for the pauper. About our feet played the children of the neighbourhood. To them our presence was nothing unusual. We were not an intrusion. We were as natural and ordinary as the brick walls and stone curbs of their environment. They had been born to the sight of the spike line, and all their brief days they had seen it. At 6 o'clock the line moved up, and we were admitted in groups of 3. Name, age, occupation, place of birth, condition of destitution, and the previous night's doss were taken with lightning-like rapidity by the superintendent. And as I turned, I was startled by a man's thrusting into my hand something that felt like a brick, and shouting into my ear, "Any knives, matches, or tobacco?" "No, sir," I lied, as lied every man who entered. As I passed downstairs to the cellar, I looked at the brick in my hand and saw that by doing violence to the language it might be called bread. By its weight and hardness it certainly must have been unleavened. The light was very dim down in the cellar, and before I knew it, some other man had thrust a pannikin into my other hand. Then I stumbled on to a still darker room, where were benches and tables and men. The place smelled vilely, and the sombre gloom and the mumble of voices from out of the obscurity made it seem more like some ante-room to the infernal regions. Most of the men were suffering from tired feet, and they prefaced the meal by removing their shoes and unbinding the filthy rags with which their feet were wrapped. This added to the general noisomeness, while it took away from my appetite. In fact, I found that I had made a mistake. I had eaten a hearty dinner 5 hours before, and to have done justice to the fare before me, I should have fasted for a couple of days. The pannikin contained skilly, 3/4 of a pint, a mixture of Indian corn and hot water. The men were dipping their bread into heaps of salt scattered over the dirty tables. I attempted the same, but the bread seemed to stick in my mouth, and I remembered the words of the carpenter, "You need a pint of water to eat the bread nicely." I went over into a dark corner where I had observed other men going, and found the water. Then I returned and attacked the skilly. It was coarse of texture, unseasoned, gross, and bitter. This bitterness, which lingered persistently in the mouth after the skilly had passed on, I found especially repulsive. I struggled manfully, but was mastered by my qualms, and 6 mouthfuls of skilly and bread was the measure of my success. The man beside me ate his own share, and mine to boot, scraped the pannikins, and looked hungrily for more. "I met a townie, and he stood me too good a dinner," I explained. "And I haven't had a bite since yesterday morning," he replied. "How about tobacco?" I asked. "Will the bloke bother with the feller now?" "Oh, no," he answered me. "No bloomin' fear. This is the easiest spike going. You ought to see some of them. Search you to the skin." The pannikins scraped clean, conversation began to spring up. "This super'tendent here is always writing to the papers about us mugs," said the man on the other side of me. "What does he say?" I asked. "Oh, he says we're no good, a lot of blackguards and scoundrels as won't work. Tells all the old tricks I've been hearing for 20 years, which I never seen a mug ever do. Last thing of his I see, he was telling how a mug gets out of the spike with a crust in his pocket, and when he sees a nice old gentleman coming along the street, he chucks the crust into the drain and borrows the old gent's stick to poke it out, and then the old gent gives him a tanner." A roar of applause greeted the time-honoured yarn, and from somewhere over in the deeper darkness came another voice, orating angrily. "Talk of the country being good for Tommy (food). I'd like to see it. I just came up from Dover. Blessed little Tommy I got. They won't give you a drink of water, they won't, much less Tommy." "There's mugs never go out of Kent," spoke a second voice. "They live bloomin' fat all along." "I come through Kent," went on the first voice, still more angrily, "and Gawd blimey if I see any Tommy, and I always notice as the blokes as talks about how much they can get when they're in the spike can eat my share of skilly as well as their bleeding own." "There's chaps in London," said a man across the table from me, "that get all the Tommy they want, and they never think of going to the country. Stay in London the year round, nor do they think of looking for a kip place to sleep till 9 or 10 o'clock at night." A general chorus verified this statement. "But they're blooming clever, them chaps," said an admiring voice. "Course they are," said another voice, "but it's not the likes o' me and you can do it. You got to be born to it, I say. Them chaps have been opening cabs and selling papers since the day they was born, and their fathers and mothers before 'em. It's all in the training, I say, and the likes of me and you 'ud starve at it." This also was verified by the general chorus, and likewise the statement that there were mugs as lives the 12-month round in the spike and never get a blessed bit of Tommy other than spike skilly and bread. "I once got 1/2 crown in the Stratford spike," said a new voice. Silence fell on the instant, and all listened to the wonderful tale. "There was 3 of us, breaking stones. Winter time, and the cold was cruel. T'other 2 said they'd be blessed if they'd do it, and they didn't. But I kept wearing into mine to warm up, you know. And then the guardians come, and t'other chaps got run in for 14 days. And the guardians, when they see what I'd been doing, gives me a tanner each, 5 of them, and turns me up." The majority of these men, nay, all of them, I found, do not like the spike, and only come to it when driven in. After the rest up, they're good for 2 or 3 days and nights on the streets, when they're driven in again for another rest. Of course, this continuous hardship quickly breaks their constitutions, and they realise it, though only in a vague way, while it is so much the common run of things that they do not worry about it. On the doss they call vagabondage here, which corresponds to on the road in the United States. The agreement is that kipping, or dossing, or sleeping, is the hardest problem they have to face, harder even than that of food. The inclement weather and the harsh laws are mainly responsible for this, while the men themselves ascribe their homelessness to foreign immigration, especially of Polish and Russian Jews, who take their places at lower wages and establish the sweating system. By 7 o'clock we were called away to bathe and go to bed. We stripped our clothes, wrapping them up in our coats and buckling our belts about them, and deposited them in a heaped rack and on the floor, a beautiful scheme for the spread of vermin. Then, 2 by 2, we entered the bathroom. There were 2 ordinary tubs, and this I know. The 2 men preceding had washed in that water, we washed in the same water, and it was not changed for the 2 men that followed us. This I know. But I am also certain that the 22 of us washed in the same water. I did no more than make a show of splashing some of this dubious liquid at myself, while I hastily brushed it off with a towel wet from the bodies of other men. My equanimity was not restored by seeing the back of one poor wretch a mass of blood from attacks of vermin and retaliatory scratching. A shirt was handed me, which I could not help but wonder how many other men had worn, and with a couple of blankets under my arm I trudged off to the sleeping apartment. This was a long, narrow room, traversed by 2 low iron rails. Between these rails were stretched, not hammocks, but pieces of canvas, 6 feet long and less than 2 feet wide. These were the beds, and they were